The best brands define their PR wow in a clear, concise, and compelling way to attract major media coverage, fans, and sales. Find out their marketing and public relations secrets today on 8 Second Branding with host Liz H. Kelly. Liz is the founder of Goody PR and the author of 8 Second PR. In each episode, she brings you the stories behind some of the best brands, CEOs, and authors. Plus, she explains how media appearances alone are 3 times more valuable than any paid ad. Now, here's your host, Liz Kelly.
Hello, this is Liz Kelly, Goody PR founder and 8 Second PR author. And we are so excited today to launch our very first podcast episode for our new podcast called 8 Second Branding, Getting to Your PR Wow. And oh my gosh, we have the best guest for you today to talk about podcasts and your podcast wow. And so we want to welcome Laura Michelle Powers, and we're going to talk about her book, Rock Your Podcast, that just came out. And this book is filled with tips on how to maximize your PR with podcasts, but also how to get on podcasts and your messaging and monetization and all kinds of great things. So the first thing I want to do is just tell you where Laura and I met, because it was fate. It must have been fate. And that was at the Sundance Film Festival in 2020. And we met through mutual friends. And you know what? I'm going to let Laura tell the story because I want you to be able to say hi. So go ahead.
Yeah, well, first of all, it was so fun. I am so grateful to have had that experience and to have connected with you. We had a wonderful time. It was really, it's so fascinating because it felt like right before the world shut down with COVID. And so I'm so grateful to have had that experience. And, one thing a lot of people don't think about podcasting is as a podcaster, you are a media person. So I was attending Sundance on press credentials as a podcaster. And I have really loved that about podcasting as an avenue to really get in the door and make these incredible connections via my podcast. Not only the press credentialing aspect, getting free press passes, in many cases, access to incredible speakers that I wouldn't otherwise have access to as a podcaster, but also it's such a great way to connect and meet people. There's so many incredible friendships and professional and personal relationships that I have developed through podcasting. So it was a wonderful experience. I really can't wait until we can have Sundance as it was, like in person again.
I totally agree. And I also had a press pass, even though I run a PR company. I'm an entertainment reporter on the side. And it started because of Sundance. And for that exact reason, you just get to meet so many great people, have so many great experiences. And I think another key thing about Sundance is it really focuses on the power of story and entertainment in general. And that's really what we're talking about with 8 Second Branding is how do you create that wow story? How do you make that emotional connection with people? And so the positive thing is that we've both been on both sides of the story as the reporter and as the person being interviewed. So anyway, it was fun at Sundance. We were sitting there with our cell phones and comparing where are we going to go next? And little did we know it was going to be the last Sundance for a long time. So, Laura, tell us more about your background. I know you've got in your introduction, you talk about your transformation and tell us a little bit about that and why you got into podcasting.
Yeah, so I've always been a very creative person. I've always been very psychic, and I'm actually most known as a psychic. I have gotten quite a bit of media coverage myself as a psychic. But when I was young, I was just very sensitive. I actually grew up thinking maybe I was crazy. I saw ghosts and spirits very much like the kid in The Sixth Sense. And I thought maybe I was crazy because other people clearly didn't see what I did. And so I learned to keep it to myself and basically would just kind of pay attention to, are other people reacting to this? Are they seeing it? And if they didn't, I just wouldn't talk about it. And then fast forward many years and a family friend described a ghost that I had seen but never told anyone about. So that was a very changing moment for me. I realized at that point that I wasn't crazy because someone else can't see something if it's a hallucination of mine. And so it was comforting, but also terrifying because I didn't really know what to do about it. I mean, this was a very different time in terms of the internet. It's so much more developed now and easy to find teachers and community. So I kept it to myself and really just tried to block it out. Fast forward many years, and I ended up in a really bad place in my life. I was in a bad marriage. The recession was hitting. I was unemployed. I was physically ill. And basically, my life had fallen apart and it was a mess. And I didn't know what to do. So I went to a psychic to get guidance for myself. And she basically told me when I blocked out my abilities, I blocked out my intuition. And of course, I'd never told her anything about seeing things or sensing things or blocking things out. She was truly psychic. And she explained to me about angels. I invited angels into my life. My life completely transformed. I went from being, physically sick, unemployed, pretty hopeless. Again, this was during the recession, to opening up to my psychic abilities, starting to take classes to learn how to better manage it for myself. I also started my company at that time, and I very quickly was guided to start a podcast. So for me, you can't really separate my sort of spiritual growth and journey with podcasting and media and just really using my voice and putting myself out there. And I grew to love what podcasting did for me. And as I grew, my podcast helped me shift and develop what I was offering with the world. So when I started my podcast, I wasn't even promoting my work as a psychic, but as I developed, I did that more and more. And it really helped me. And then I was able to leverage podcasts into other media appearances and then into television and some pretty big stuff. So if you haven't been familiar with my work, like I've been on Will Ferrell's podcast, the Ron Burgundy podcast. I've been featured by BuzzFeed. I've been on a lot of television shows. I work with celebrities regularly. And none of that would have happened if it weren't for podcasting. So I'm very passionate about podcasting, both for what it can do on a practical level, but as well as on a spiritual level. It's a really wonderful platform to literally like put your voice out into the world, clear your throat chakra. So, I'm a person where I talk about all the practical and the logistical stuff, and then I also talk about all the woo. So hopefully here people are open to that at least somewhat. But whatever you want, whether you're going to come from the more practical, analytical aspect or the woo, energetic, spiritual, I think podcasting and PR has something for you.
Absolutely. Well, and when you told that story at Sundance, I was just blown away because we're running around all these parties and I don't really know who you are. And then we go to somebody's house and we're having like a private dinner in the kitchen. I think we ate hot dogs.
Yes.
We were very happy to
hot dogs.
Yeah, we were very happy to have these hot dogs and get away from the crowd. And you started telling your story. And I mean, you could hear a pin drop in the room. And it was just fascinating to hear about your psychic background and your media background. And then how many podcasts do you host?
I do host 6 podcasts. Not all of them do I release regularly. I mean, with podcasting, I think there's different reasons to host podcasts. And sometimes I'll do something when I'm wanting to learn about a particular topic, and I would start a podcast on it. And then some of them are very tied in with my regular work and business. And so I do those more frequently. So I have one weekly podcast, and then I have a couple others that I release twice a month or so. And then I have some that I release maybe once a month, or just kind of when I feel the urge and inkling to. But my podcast, Healing Powers podcast, is the one that's really tied in with my business. And that's the one I've been doing for about 10 years.
Yeah. And that's one that I've listened to and I really love it. And I appreciate you having some of our clients on as guests to talk about important topics about healing and about addiction and child psychology and other things that are so important. So now that podcast is a top 100 podcast. So can you talk about how that works and how did you get to be a top 100 podcast?
Yeah. So for those who aren't familiar with podcasting, there's podcast charts and there's different charts. The ones that are most frequently used would be the Apple podcast / iTunes podcast charts. And still more than half of all podcast listens are on that platform. So if you're a podcaster and you're not on that platform, get on that platform right away. You definitely want to be on there. But there are various companies that basically monitor the charts for you. And that has to do with just the number of listens / streams that happen within a certain amount of time. So it's very much like the book best-selling charts. It's like a certain amount of time, like that day, that week. Then based on how many listens a podcast gets, then it can, chart on the charts. And as a podcaster, I think it's helpful to track that. For a while, I didn't track that. And I think I'd been charting for a while and just didn't even know it. But basically, yeah, you select a service like Podcharts or one of these other ones. I think Chartable is another one. And it just tells you, if you're making a placement on the charts. And I pop in and out. It's not like I'm always in there. Even, if it's been a little bit like later in the week, I might not chart as much as when a brand new episode is released, because suddenly it gets a lot of downloads. But it's actually not as hard as you might think to chart if you're doing the things right, because the thing about podcasting is it's often like a more niched audience. So it's very different than like a big television show or something. You don't need a huge number of people to connect and listen to your show to actually make a significant placement on the charts. And as someone who is, a business owner, I really recommend for people to pursue podcasts and work on getting onto podcasts, because, for example, in terms of the impact it's had on my business. So I've been on television shows where every segment had 2 million views, like, major presence, or a big podcast like Will Ferrell's podcast. And that's great for my business in one way. It's the visibility, it's the sort of know, like, and trust factor, builds credibility. But I have had more impact on my business on some very small podcasts that were very niched to my area. So it doesn't have to be a big podcast. If you're a guest on it, to have a pretty significant impact. Like, there's one small podcast that I've appeared on that I can directly tie 50K of revenue to, as an example.
Oh, wow. Well, we definitely want to talk about that one. Let me see. I want to shift a little bit back. I want to go back to that story, the 50K one. But if you were described, because we're talking about branding, and obviously you are a brand. So one of the things that we talk to our clients about is the fact that the average attention span of an adult is 8 seconds. So you've got to be clear, concise, and compelling and get to the point immediately. And storytelling is great. And we definitely want to talk about stories. But if you had to talk about your personal brand using 3 adjectives, you would say Laura Michelle Powers is, and what would you say?
What I usually say is celebrity, psychic, and creative entrepreneur. And it's tough because I do a lot of different things. As a psychic, I literally channel music, I channel books, I act. And when I perform, I've had people be like, it felt like it wasn't you on there. And I'm like, that's because I'm channeling, I'm channeling even when I perform. So that's typically what I say. But it is, I think, a constant challenge, especially when you do multiple things. Like, how do you encompass all that with whatever it is that you're saying?
Exactly. It's so hard. I mean, with Goody PR, I try to say Goody PR magnifies good through marketing, PR, and social media for successful business leaders. And that for successful business leaders is important because those are the types of clients that we want to attract. So I guess by saying you're a celebrity psychic, that's attracting people. What type of target market does that attract to you, maybe?
So I would say I have kind of 2 demographics. I have celebrities. I have a lot of high-end business clientele. So a lot of people don't think of psychics as working in business, but actually a lot of the work that I do as a psychic is consulting for business. It's not like there's the spiritual realm and then there's the business money, it's like, to me, they're very connected, and there's no reason not to get guidance or support and help in money and business. So a lot of my regular clientele are doing very well in business, and they're business leaders or business owners. And then I also have another set of clientele, which are those who are wanting to build their own spiritual or creative businesses. So, those demographics are a little different, but I do see that a lot of those that are wanting to build, I think, ultimately do get successful. I just might catch them a little bit earlier on in their path than the psychic clientele. Like, I have millionaire clients, billionaire clients, celebrity clients, and that seems to be just a really nice niche for me. And, at one point when I was working in my business, and I was like, oh, why am I not targeting businesses more? They just have so much more money, generally speaking, than the average person. Like, bigger budgets, it can be, depending on how they want to do it, it could potentially be a business expense for them. consulting. So yeah, that's an area that I love. And as a business owner myself, I love operating that. And I really do love to see the successes that people have when they implement some of the things that are coming through psychically.
And you probably have a lot of clients who, have their breakthrough moment by talking to you. Would you say that's true?
I would say that's true. And then it's really fascinating also just to see the long term, because I also have a lot of clients that work with me regularly long term, like for years. And, there are some like really big immediate breakthroughs. And then there are things where, we've been working on something for a period of time, maybe even years. And then suddenly it's like, bam, these incredible shifts that happen. So it can happen both kind of long term and then some things that are very short term. But I love what I do because it's very rewarding. Like I love to see the positive changes that people are making. And, if you're not loving what you do, like you can change it. Like I used to have the job that was like, Sunday nights, I'd be like, oh, I don't want to go to work tomorrow. And there are times when maybe I may be tired from just, life stuff, but I love what I do. And it's totally possible to shift, change, attract clientele that you like, that appreciate you. And that's part of what I love is I work with some amazing people who are very grateful. I'm grateful to work with them. They're grateful to work with me. And it's totally possible to create that. And I do credit a lot of podcasting for that. It's helped me really attract and connect with quality people.
That's really great feedback. And I totally agree. You really want to love what you do. And what I'm hearing in this conversation is how your personal brand and your business brand really overlap. And that's what I think is so important. And a lot of people don't get that. They want to sell their company, but they don't want to talk about their personal brand. And I always say, no, it's the story behind the story that is going to sell it. So your transformation, your experience, all of that, I think is what emotionally connects with people and makes your business even more successful. So if we talk more, I want to shift now to your business brand because it does overlap. So you've got your celebrity psychic part of your business, but you do a lot of different things. So what are other parts of your business?
Yeah. So especially when the pandemic started, I started really focusing on helping other people launch their podcast. And it was something that was a message I was given, just that it was something that was very needed. Now, as we switched to being more and more online due to COVID, podcasting and booking podcast appearances or media appearances is something that is more important than ever. I mean, I think it's been important for a long time, but so I started focusing a bit more on that this past year, just because I just saw a need. And I also was getting the guidance for many of my clients to go this way, like start a podcast, get booked on podcasts, do media. And I felt that they needed a little support to get there, because when you're new and you're not in that area, it can feel a bit overwhelming on the tech side, as well as just the energetic resistance, putting yourself out there, using your voice. We're taught to be small and, kind of that we're powerless. And so it's a lot to move through that sometimes, especially when you're first starting out. So I'm doing more of that. But a lot of those clients are also my woo clients, meaning they're my psych. They start out as my psychic clients. And then as they're guided to step into some of these areas for themselves, it's like, okay, well, here, connect with that. And I think if you are interested in booking PR and podcasting and figuring out how to do that, and you are on more the woo side, then it's helpful. Like a lot of the podcast teachers out there are very techie analytical guys, and if you're very into the kind of the energetic spiritual, talking about chakras and whatnot, that just may not be your jam. Like you just may not feel comfortable or feel like you get as much. You're just kind of in a different world from learning from a very analytical and tech approaching person in terms of podcasting.
And actually you have your celebrity psychic, I guess, readings that you offer. You have books, you have music, you have podcasts. Is there anything else? And
then I'm going to be launching a course on writing and publishing as well this summer. It's the same thing. I just feel like so many of my clients could use a little bit of support, like they're getting the message to write a book. And it's like, okay, how do I move through this? And a lot of courses talk about the technical side, but they don't talk about that energetic, the resistance, like the war of art, that, that idea of like, okay, that self-sabotaging idea when we're trying to branch into something that is, challenging for us, but going to be really rewarding for us in the end. Yeah. So I think those are the main things. And then I just love teaching. Like I've always loved teaching. I think it's a part of what I do as a psychic is teaching and sharing and helping to educate people. So it's funny, if you're into astrology at all, there's like astrology books that are on this day, and the description for the people born on my day is the teacher. So it's just like interesting, because even when I was young, I was always teaching. So I don't think I can like not teach. It has to be a part of what I do, and even if it's on the podcast.
Absolutely. Well, I think sharing information, I talk to my clients about how you want to entertain and educate anytime you have an interview, because nobody just wants to hear about you. They want to hear tips. They want to hear you educate them or share something new. So I think one of the things that I just want to stress, and you know this, but for the listeners, is just this importance of when you have a brand, that you have all these different wheels and you have all these different things that are contributing to building your brand story. Because I say PR is a marathon, it's not a sprint. Yeah. I have people who will call me and say, we want to launch a book and we want to hire you for a 3-month marketing campaign. And I say, well, okay, we can do that, but you need to carry that further after we stop working. And a lot of clients end up working much longer. I have one client that I've had for 10 years, another one I had for 5, and a lot of them will hire us for a year, because you really need a year to get that momentum going. And do things like write guest columns or start your own podcast, all of the things you're doing. I mean, it's just a great example.
Absolutely. It is a long-term, and specifically with podcasting, because that's an area I know a lot about. And just to give people context, I've been podcasting for 10 years, which is a long time. I speak at most of the big podcasting conferences, and it's a long-term game. And there's something called the long tail, which is very important for podcasts. So a lot of media, say traditional television, for example, you're on and it's like you get a lot of a flood of interest and views when it's out, and then it's like nothing happens pretty much. And you can pull that and put it on your reel and everything, but in terms of the traffic that's generated, where people will regularly discover my podcast and listen to all 10 years of episodes. They binge it like Netflix. Literally, this happens all the time. Yes. And then frequently after that is when they reach out and book a session, purchase a class or product or something. And so, and it's the same with sponsors. This frequently happens with people that aren't used to sponsoring a podcast. They'll book an ad or a month of ads, like what you talked about, short term, and then they'll cancel it. This has happened so many times. And then 6 months later, they're like, okay, we want to rebook, because they saw in what's called the long tail, which is longer term, that it really does have a lot of success. So it's important with media that you consider that it's like planting all these seeds. Some of these things have a short term, return, and some of them it's going to be a lot longer. And it's also about building. So a lot of people want to jump to the top immediately, and if you don't have a track record, you first of all, you might not get those bigger opportunities, but also you may not feel ready for them. I'm so grateful for all the experience that I had leading up. So just to give people a context and a story. So when I got invited to Will Ferrell's podcast, and by the way, that's not generally one that you pitch, you need to be invited to that one. So they reached out and invited me, and I asked the producer, I said, what was your process like? And she said she found me online, and then she spent several hours on my website before they reached out to me. And I literally was several hours.
Wow.
But just to make that clear, whatever you've done, whatever media you have, make sure that it's really painted on there. I have a reel, I have here's my appearances, here's all my books, so it's a building thing, that really whatever you've done, make sure that's clear. And then as you get bigger opportunities, just add that and make sure that you keep kind of upgrading and doing that. And even a small podcast appearance can have a really huge impact. And then you can use that to leverage something even bigger.
I think that's so important to stress, that, the small media can lead to much bigger things, because I try to explain that to my clients.
Yeah.
And when they get a say a book review in a small blog, I say, you have no idea who might find you. I've actually had client leads from one blog, and it's called 25 Best Book Publicists. And I get leads every week from that blog. And it's called the John Fox blog. Nobody ever heard of the John Fox blog, but I want to write this guy a thank you letter. I gotta do something to thank him, because it's this one blog that's really leapfrogging my business. And the same thing with podcasts. You can get into a niche podcast and then you reach your audience, and it's magic. We're gonna wrap up in a couple of minutes, but I really would like to know, you've got it's chapter 9 in the book about how to leverage your podcast for PR, and you've talked a lot about that, but can you talk about that chapter and then maybe the 50,000K story?
Sure. So in terms of building media credentials and, your track record, I think it's really important to start wherever you are. And a lot of people think, well, I don't know how to begin. So podcasting is a great way to begin. And the other piece is connecting with your circle. I guarantee there's someone in your circle that you could reach out to that would provide some sort of connection. I think having your own show is one of the best ways to get bookings yourself, because if you have a platform, it's so much easier to be like, hey, you want to be on my show and I can be on yours? or just, hey, you want to be in my show? And if they have a show, frequently they will invite you on afterwards if it's a fit. Like, that happens all the time. It's about building these relationships. But even if you just get on one of these like online groups, there's different podcast groups where you can just literally, basically pitch to like be a guest for whatever it is that you want to talk about. And there's always new shows that are looking for people as guests, like always. They're starting out, you're starting out, and then you have that, as someone who gets pitches, because I get pitches all the time. I mean, I get so many pitches that, I'll be honest, most of the time I just delete them unless it's compelling or I have a connection, just because I'm a very busy business owner and I just don't have the time. But I get a lot of bad pitches. And I want to say 2 things about that. 1, make sure that it stands out, and 2, make sure that it's something where you're showing your value. Like, what are you going to provide? Instead of, most pitches are like, what do they want? And as someone who, I have a busy business and I have my people that I pay and I have my, my agenda, it's like, unless you show me what it is that you're going to offer for me and my audience, it's usually going to be a delete. So connect with people that or that can help you, and definitely take a course, get in the room, because that'll help you with building these relationships as well. And then whatever you have, create a reel, create your promo materials, because you can create a reel, even if you've just been on small podcasts, you can literally take video from that. And there's programs like rev.com where you can get the transcript and you can put it underneath in text what was being said, so that it creates an interactive, kind of video. And then once you get bigger ones, you can just replace parts of that reel, but that will make you stand out as well.
Yeah, I think transcripts are really important for these interviews. I've done that, and it's just invaluable, because you'll say really important points and then you can leverage it and turn it into a press release, or turn it into a blog, or turn it into another video. So that's a great tip. So tell us about the 50,000K opportunity you got that you mentioned before. I think everybody wants to know that.
Yeah. So by the way, I teach podcasting, and I'll say that, like, I have guest speakers on my podcast courses, and like, I told that story, and then one of my podcast speakers was like, oh yeah, I have one podcast appearance I can directly tie 200K of revenue to. So I just want to share, like, this is not like pie out of the sky. So this frequent will be from being on another podcast, and if it's niche to your audience, and then the referrals that come from that. And it doesn't have to be a big podcast. And the other piece I want to say is that it's not always going to be right away. Like, that particular podcast, a lot of the revenue that I generated from that in terms of client bookings was from a year afterwards. Like, so it wasn't, because a lot of people will be on a show and they don't get immediate traction, and they're like, well, that wasn't really helpful. And it's like, wait, because again, the long tail with podcasting, it could be months, a year, several years, and it could still have a return for you. So I think of it as planting all these seeds, and then it starts to come in. And as someone who's been podcasting for 10 years, and now that I teach it and know some of the best practices, there's almost not a day that goes by where I don't have some kind of revenue for my podcast. Like literally, I'm constantly getting, whether that's a sponsor, whether that's some kind of affiliate commission, whether that's a client that comes in from a podcast. So it's possible. Just give it some time. Like, if you don't get immediate, like lots of your registrations or payments that come right away, that's okay. But just give it some time, and it can really build in an incredible way.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. So I have one other question that is more a technical question that I think a lot of people want to know. And that is, when you sent me your book, Rock Your Podcast by Laura Michelle Powers, make sure you buy this book.
Thank you.
You sent me a little microphone keychain, which is adorable. So anyway, a lot of people ask, you have a microphone in your picture on the cover too. A lot of people want to know, what kind of microphone should you get? So can you give any tips on that, or anything technical that you think is important?
Yeah. So first of all, that photo was taken at my friend Allison Melody's podcast studio, and she hosts the Food Heals podcast, which is a big podcast on health and, for vegans. And so that was her setup. But I have a similar one. I'll just put it in the frame so you can see this mic.
Wow.
I like that. It has a similar to the arm that you can see in the photo on my book cover. That's the kind of mic I like. It just basically has a clip so that it latches onto a desktop or a table. But I'll just be honest, you don't need a lot of tech. That you can literally, you can use a set of earbuds as long as they're wired in and a good quality set. And I know a lot of like big podcasters, top 100 podcasters, and that's literally what they use to record. So if that's a stress point for you or a budget point for you, don't stress about it. Many big podcasts are literally hosted on Zoom with earbuds. And then it's kind of like cars. You can get, you can get a Pinto, or you can get like a Ferrari, or, Bentley, whatever. Like there's a lot of levels. But you can still have pretty good audio quality as long as you have a good connection if you're working remotely with some pretty simple, tools that don't cost a lot of money. So don't let that be a barrier for you from starting. And you can always, I'm a big fan of the Start Ugly idea. And Chris Christmasos, he is the host and producer of PodFast, which is one of the big podcast conferences. He wrote a book called Start Ugly, and that's really his motto is, begin, and then even if it's ugly, you've started and you can upgrade. And a lot of people wait until everything's perfect. And the problem with that, a lot of people, then they just don't start. They wait for so long. And a lot of times you don't even know what you need to do until you just get going. So just do it, and you can upgrade it or fix it later.
So it's okay that my earbud fell out in the middle and now I got to put it back in. I'm like, okay, I'm not used to earbuds. Anyway, now it doesn't look right, but that's okay. Now I can hear you better. Well, thank you so much for being our guest today. I think your tips are just so invaluable, and I really loved reading your book, this Rock Your Podcast. First of all, I love the cover. I love the title. And I mean, your pictures are just awesome. I know you put a lot of pictures up on Facebook to ask people which one is the best one. So that's another tip. It's great. Facebook is like your instant focus group.
I love it. Yeah, that's a big thing. If you haven't read The 4-Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss, I highly recommend that. But he talks a lot about A/B testing and doing surveying and kind of just testing what people like, what people click on. And there's two things I want to mention in that. One is like, do that for whatever it is that you're working on, your, promo cover, website design, whatever. You can use that. And people love to give their opinion. So it's like a way of marketing. You get feedback, and then it's already promoting it without seeming like it's promoted, because you're just asking for feedback, but people then are engaged, and you're prepping them for whatever it is that you're launching. So whether that's your website, whether that's a book, whether that's a podcast, et cetera. And the other thing is the importance of good photos. It is so important. Like, if you were a public figure, if you have a business, like, please invest in a good photographer.
This is so good. This picture, let's see if I can hold it up. I love it.
And for that, my friend Allison, like I said, she offered for me to use her studio, which is amazing. It has that beautiful red background, the white chair, the dust, all of it. And, hired a professional makeup artist, and I hired a professional photographer. And it's so worth it, because you want your images. It's like, an image speaks 1,000 words, and you want it to speak well. And it's one of the areas that I knew to invest in from the beginning. Even when I had almost no money, I would hire a professional photographer. So I see that that's a mistake that I think I see a lot of people doing, where you can do a lot with an iPhone, but it's just not the phone. It's also the photographer, and then, to getting a little bit of touch up and making sure the lighting is right. And all of these things make a really significant impact.
Absolutely. I can't agree with you more on that one. I've had a couple of clients where they get professional photo shoots, and then they immediately want to change the back cover of their book, because it's like night and day, the quality. Yeah. And it really impacts your brand. So thank you again. My last question is just, where can people find you? And is there anything that we missed?
Gosh, one thing I just want to touch on is the idea of authenticity, and kind of like your mess is your message. I don't know if people have heard that idea, but a lot of times people want to hide their struggles, their challenges. And that's actually so much of what makes you special, is your journey, and then how you've overcome that, and then what you can share with people. People find that inspirational. It's the story. Like, I've read so many books that are very academic in style, and they may be presenting facts that are helpful, but it's like not engaging. So, make sure you're presenting that for other people, for yourself, and don't feel like you're trying to hide, whatever is your challenge is often also your superpower in a way. And we need more superpowers, more superheroes in this world. So really put that out there for yourself, and not be afraid of being different. I think what makes you different also is what makes you stand out, and what makes people connect with you. So, I do have a fairly unusual niche, but when I tried to hide what made me different, like when I was kind of in the psychic spiritual closet, that's when I struggled the most. And when I went through that process, I'm just going to say this and put it out there, that's when things really unfolded for me in a really wonderful way. So I feel like that's the case for a lot of other people. So whether that's addiction, whether that's, some kind of challenge that you've been through personally, or trauma, or whatever that is, there's a difference between focusing on that too much and where it can feel heavy, but especially if you've overcome something, if you learn something, I think that's really helpful for people. And then if people want to learn or connect with me, my psychic website is healingpowers.net. So tied in with my last name, Powers, and then powershour.biz is where you can learn about my, book courses and podcast courses, and connecting with all that. And on social media, I'm at that Laura Powers on Twitter. Instagram is Laura Powers 44 being an angel number, like not typed out, but just the numbers. And then I'm on Facebook at Laura Michelle Powers.
Oh, I love that. I didn't know 44 was an angel number.
Yeah. So there's different numbers that you can just Google, like angel number, and whatever number comes up. And anytime something is repeated, it's basically like a stronger message. So 444 is the angels saying hello.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Well, thank you, Laura. And thank you to all the listeners out there for joining us for our very first 8-Second Branding podcast. We're here to help you. We're here to make you magnify your PR wow. And please check us out at where do you check me out? Everywhere. But anyway, go to goodypr.com or follow me at Liz H. Kelly. Thank you so much. Thanks, Laura. And go buy Laura's book, Rock Your Podcast.